Friends, I ask for your continued listening ears as we all hear from the topic, Where the Wind Blows. You know, I don't mean to brag, but I still remember a good deal of my Hebrew from seminary. Now, in all seriousness, I couldn't do a translation without some serious help from my textbooks or from some smarter people than me. But I remember enough of it to still be inspired by it all these years. They were right. I actually would keep using it after seminary was over. And you know, my favorite Hebrew word is the word ruach. Ruach, meaning wind, breath, spirit. It's the word used in Exodus when it describes how the east wind parted the sea so that Israel could pass through on dry ground. It's the word used to describe life itself all throughout the Old Testament. God's ruach, bringing things into being. It's the word that is used for human respiration and the very commandment of God. And it is the word used for spirit by the prophet Joel. In Joel 2, chapter 2, verse 28, I will pour out my spirit, my ruach, upon all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Ruach. Something about the imagery of wind as it refers to God's Spirit, as it refers to life itself, has always compelled me and inspired me. You know, you can't see the wind, but you can definitely feel it. You can track it, but you can't control where it goes. You might be able to predict to some degree of certainty where it will blow, but you do not determine its path or its timing. It's terrifying. Ask our friends in the Caribbean. It's unruly. It's powerful and totally awesome and totally out of our control. Wind recalls the Pentecost event in Acts 2. Now, because you and I cannot apprehend the wind, the folks who were watching the Pentecost event, who were watching these people speaking in tongues, had a hard time making sense of what they were seeing. What does this mean? They asked each other. And yet others dismissed these fire-filled folks as being drunken, even though it was only 9 a.m. in the morning, although we know that doesn't stop everybody. So Peter had to break it down for them. This is what the prophet Joel was talking about. I will pour out my ruach, my wind, my breath, my life, my commandment, my spirit upon all flesh. The prophet Ezekiel's vision of the valley of dry bones is arguably the most familiar portion of his very long collection of oracles. He is speaking to a Judah that is in exile. A Judah that is in exile in Babylon. A Judah that feels forgotten and relegated to the consequences of their own rebellion. They are the bones, and not just any bones, mind you, but dry bones. Bones that have been without flesh for a very long time now. In other words, they're good and dead. Can these bones live? The Lord asks Ezekiel. Now, deferring to the infinite wisdom of God and probably thinking that it was a trick question, Ezekiel answers with, "Oh, Lord, you know." Then God tells Ezekiel to prophesy to them. Let these bones that don't even have ears hear what I'm saying to them. Tell them that I am going to put flesh back on them. What kind of faith does it require for you to not even have ears, but expect flesh and to hear God's word to you? Tell them I'm going to put breath back in them. Breath, ruach, spirit, that word is used 10 times in that pericope alone. And even as the bones began to rattle and the flesh and the sinews started to appear back on the bones, it still was not enough until the ruach came along and joined the process. I think about this imagery. I think about this valley of dry bones, and I wonder, what is it about bones, you all? Why is it that when we pass on and our bodies expire and decay, that our bones, by comparison, stay intact? What's up with that? Well, perhaps there is a spiritual and practical illustration in that. The things about us that are the most hard and rigid are also the hardest to die off. As it is with our bodies, so it is with our structures, our systems, those parts of our systems which are the most rigid and unyielding, those parts that we believe are holding the system upright, will remain long after the flesh and breath have left them. When life goes out of a being, for some reason the bones never get the message because they stick around. They take up space. We have a tendency, Presbyterians, to prefer the rigidity and the structure of the bone, but neglect the benefit of the flesh. Now, when we hear the word flesh in churchy circles, it's normally not a good thing, right? But consider for a moment what our flesh affords us, what our flesh allows us to do, what it provides for us. You know, we have nerve endings in our skin that allow us to feel touch. And touch can be incredibly therapeutic. Our sense of touch helps us understand that there is another body right next to us, that we are not alone. Our sense of touch helps us understand that we are in relationship with each other. Have you ever gotten a massage? You know how healing that can be? When we pass the peace of Christ, how do we do that? We shake hands. We hug each other. We vocalize, the peace of Christ be with you. We use our flesh. Ezekiel's oracles often describe God and fleshing something that is hard and unyielding. Chapter 11, verse 9, I will remove their heart of stone from their flesh and give them a heart of flesh. Again, in chapter 36, verse 26, I will remove your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Enfleshment softens us, you all. Enfleshment makes us vulnerable. It makes the space that we take up meaningful. Enfleshment enables relationship. In his book, The Christian Imagination, Dr. Willie Jennings of Yale Divinity School writes about the pedagogy of incarnation. Having flesh has a way of teaching us how to be in relationship with one another. And that is why God, God's self, put on flesh and dwelt among us so that we might be in relationship with God and with each other. Jesus healed by touch, smearing mud on a blind man's eyes. He emoted outside of the tomb of a dead man, and he wept as he called him back forth into life. That he was touchable himself led to healing for a woman with an issue of blood, and to salvation and forgiveness for a weeping sinner woman who washed his feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. And as he hung from a tree on a Friday afternoon, his bones might not have been broken, but his flesh was. And after his resurrection, it was the wounds in his flesh, on his hands, in his side, that bore witness to his triumph over that which kills. And yet flesh and bone are ultimately moot without the spirit that animates them. Our life as a church is animated by none other than the Spirit of God, and we need to remember that, y'all. We need to remember that. It is God's Spirit that calls us. It is God's Spirit that animates us. It is God's Spirit that sets us on our way. It is God's Spirit that empowers us. It is God's Spirit that equips us. It is God's Spirit that sends us. And it is God's Spirit that grows us and adds to us. And as long as God is God, the church will be the church. In ways that we're used to seeing it be. Maybe not in ways that affirm our comfort. Maybe not in ways that we understand at all. But it's still the church. You know, I'll use this example. I am a coffee drinker, and I haven't had nearly enough today. And I drink coffee when I need energy, as I describe it. Except coffee does not give you energy. You know that, right? Coffee gives you a jolt. Sustained energy comes from good nutrition, lots of water, lots of rest, lots of good lifestyle habits. Jolts are good if you just need help getting started, but they can't sustain you. They're not what gives you life. Friends, I'm afraid I've seen too much of Jesus' church looking for jolts rather than sustaining life. We look for the jolts of compelling programs to get people in the pews. We look for the jolts of capital campaigns to keep our buildings. We look for jolts in so many places and in so many things, and too often we neglect or devalue the very thing that truly gives us life, because if at its heart it's not about sharing the good news of Jesus Christ or liberating people from their chains, if it's not about loving our neighbors as we have been loved by our God, if it does not stand opposed to a world in which self-interest is the order of the day, what good is it for? A body without the Spirit that animates it is a corpse. Flesh eventually decays. Bones will get dry because these things are ephemeral, but the Spirit endures. The Spirit gives life. The Spirit gives bodies, both biological and institutional, meaning. Friends, prophesy life to the dead and rigid places among us. Let the stony places give way to the softness, vulnerability, and teachability and relationship that God calls us into. And may all of it be quickened, guided, and sustained by the Spirit. You vast multitude, stand on your feet and prophesy. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Wind. Amen.